The weight of tomorrow. Natalie Harper stood outside the entrance of the Grandview estate, smoothing down her simple black catering uniform for the third time. The autumn breeze carried the scent of expensive perfume and cigar smoke from the exclusive charity gala happening beyond the ornate iron gates. She wasn't supposed to be here. Art teachers didn't belong in this world of crystal chandeliers and six-figure donations. But when her younger brother, Owen's latest medical bills arrived, showing aggressive leukemia treatment costs that would bankrupt them twice over, she'd taken this catering job without hesitation, a world apart inside the ballroom. Natalie moved through the crowd like a ghost, balancing silver trays of champagne and carefully avoiding eye contact with the wealthy guests. She watched them laugh and dance, their jewelry probably worth more than her entire year's salary. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she wondered what it felt like to never worrying about money, to never wake up at 3 in the morning, calculating which bills to pay first. A commotion near the grand staircase caught her attention. A distinguished older gentleman in a wheelchair was gesturing animatedly at a tall, dark-haired man in an impeccably tailored navy suit. Even from across the room, Natalie could see the younger man's jaw was tight with frustration, his posture radiating controlled tension. "That's Dr. Julian Westbrook," whispered Maria, another server, the cardiac surgeon. "Word is his grandfather's been pressuring him to get married 4 years. Family dynasty stuff." Maria rolled her eyes. Rich people problems. The collision atelier was heading back to the kitchen when disaster struck. A guest stepped backward without looking, colliding with her tray. Champagne glasses went flying, and one of them shattered spectacularly at the feet of none other than Dr. Julian Westbrook himself. "I'm so sorry," Natalie gasped, immediately dropping to her knees to gather the broken crystal, her face burning with humiliation. She could feel dozens of eyes on her, could hear the whisper starting. "Stop." The voice was deep, commanding but not unkind. A hand appeared in her line of vision, extended toward her. "You'll cut yourself." Natalie looked up into the most striking grey eyes she'd ever seen. Dr. Westbrook was even more handsome up close, with sharp cheekbones and a mouth that suggested he rarely smiled. But there was something in his expression, a flash of recognition, as if he saw past her uniform to the person underneath. "Let me help," he said. And to her absolute shock, he knelt down beside her, carefully picking up the larger pieces of glass. "Sir, you really don't have to." Julian, he corrected. "And I insist." An unexpected proposal. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Natalie was certain she'd be fired, but instead, as the gala was winding down, one of the event coordinators found her. "Dr. Westbrook would like to speak with you in the library." "Don't worry, you're not in trouble." The library was a sanctuary of leather and mahogany, lined with first editions that probably cost more than Natalie's car. Julian stood by the window, his back to her, staring out at the manicured gardens bathed in moonlight. "Miss Harper," he began without turning around, "I've taken the liberty of learning your name. Forgive the intrusion, but I also know about your brother's condition. I have connections at the hospital." Natalie's blood ran cold. How did he know? And more importantly, why? He turned to face her, and she was struck by how tired he looked, how much older than his 35 years. "I have a proposition for you, one that could solve both our problems." The contract. What Julian proposed was insane. His grandfather, the legendary Dr. Theodore Westbrook, was dying of congestive heart failure. His final wish was to see Julian happily married before he passed. The family fortune, the hospital legacy, everything hung in the balance. "I need a wife," Julian said bluntly. "Not a real one. A performance. 1 year. You'll live in my home, attend family functions, play the devoted spouse. In exchange, I'll ensure Owen receives the absolute best treatment available. Every bill, every medication, every procedure. You'll never see another invoice." Natalie's head spun. "Why me?" "Because you need this as desperately as I do," he replied with brutal honesty. "Because you won't develop expectations. And because when I looked at you tonight, I saw someone intelligent enough to understand what I'm offering and strong enough to maintain boundaries." He slid a folder across the desk. There's one critical condition. If either of us develops genuine romantic feelings, the contract terminates immediately. No compensation, no continued medical coverage. This arrangement works precisely because emotion has no place in it. Natalie stared at the contract, her hands trembling. It was a devil's bargain. A year of pretending, of living a lie, but Owen would live. He would have a fighting chance. She thought of her brother's pale face in that hospital bed, of his quiet bravery as he endured treatment after treatment. She thought of the fear in her mother's eyes every time the doctor came in with test results. "Where do I sign?" Natalie whispered. Julian's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Relief perhaps, or was it regret? He handed her an expensive pen, and Natalie Harper signed away a year of her life, never imagining that some contracts were impossible to honor, and some feelings were impossible to deny. The clock on the library mantel chimed midnight, and her new life began. Moving Dave Westbrook Mansion sat on 5 pristine acres in the most exclusive neighborhood Natalie had ever seen. As the car pulled through the gates, she pressed her face against the window like a child, taking in the immaculate gardens, the fountain that probably cost more than her childhood home, and the house itself a modern architectural masterpiece of glass, stone, and impossible elegance. Julian met her at the entrance, his expression professionally neutral. "Your belongings have been moved to the East Wing. I've taken the liberty of having a wardrobe prepared for you. Public appearances require a certain presentation." Natalie bristled at the implication, but bit her tongue. This was business, nothing more. Her suite was larger than her entire apartment, decorated in soft creams and blues, with French doors opening onto a private terrace. In the walk-in closet, she found designer dresses, shoes, and accessories that must have cost a small fortune. Everything fit perfectly. He'd been thorough. The first performance, their first public appearance, was a family dinner at Theodore Westbrook's estate. Natalie's stomach churned with nerves as Julian's hand settled on the small of her back, guiding her into the dining room. Theodore Westbrook was a formidable presence even in his wheelchair, with sharp blue eyes that seemed to see straight through her carefully constructed facade. Julian's mother, Victoria, was an elegant woman with a cool smile that didn't reach her eyes. His sister, Charlotte, looked openly skeptical. "So," Theodore began, his voice still strong despite his failing body. "Tell me how you two met." Natalie felt Julian's hand tighten slightly on hers under the table. "They'd rehearsed this story a dozen times at the hospital," Natalie said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I was visiting Owen, my brother. Julian was making his rounds. I dropped my sketchbook, and he picked it up. We started talking about art, and somehow ... double quotes. She glanced at Julian, who was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Somehow, we couldn't stop talking. It was close enough to a truth that it didn't feel like a complete lie." They had talked, late into that first night, after she'd signed the contract, about everything and nothing. She'd learned he played piano, that he'd wanted to be an artist before his family's expectations crushed that dream. He'd learned about her passion for teaching, her fear of losing Owen, her secret hope of opening an art school someday. Theodore studied them both for a long moment, then smiled. "Young love. There's nothing quite like it." Cracks in the armored days fell into a strange rhythm. Julian left early for the hospital and returned late, often finding Natalie in the library sketching or reading. They maintained their distance, speaking only when necessary about upcoming events or family obligations. But there were moments, small, unexpected moments that felt dangerously real. One evening, Natalie found Julian in his study, his head in his hands, surrounded by patient files. "Rough day?" she asked softly from the doorway. He looked up, surprise flickering across his face. "I lost a patient, a teenager. Her heart just gave out during surgery." Without thinking, Natalie crossed the room and sat beside him. "I'm sorry. I'm supposed to be immune to this," he said, his voice raw. "After years of practice, you'd think it would get easier. If it got easier," Natalie said gently, "you'd be the kind of doctor who shouldn't be doing this work. Your caring makes you better at what you do. He turned to look at her, really look at her, and something shifted in the air between them. "Thank you," he whispered. That night, Natalie lay awake thinking about the vulnerable man she'd seen. So different from the cold professional who'd offered her a contract. She reminded herself sternly of the clause, of what would happen if she let herself care too much. The charity Galathea. Most challenging test came at the annual Westbrook Foundation Gala. Natalie wore a stunning emerald dress that Julian had personally selected, and when she emerged from her room, she caught his sharp intake of breath. "You look ... double quotes," he paused, seeming to struggle for words. "Beautiful." The gala was overwhelming, hundreds of guests, photographers, journalists. Julian never left her side, his hand a constant presence at her waist, his attention seemingly focused entirely on her. He introduced her to colleagues and donors, his voice filled with a pride that felt disturbingly genuine. "Dance with me," he murmured as the orchestra began a waltz. On the dance floor, surrounded by other couples, they moved together with an ease that surprised them both. Natalie could feel the heat of his hand through the thin fabric of her dress, could smell his cologne, could see the way his eyes had darkened as they looked at her. "You're a good dancer," she said, needing to break the charged silence. "My mother insisted on lessons," he replied. "She said a gentleman needed to know how to properly escort a lady." His lips quirked in a half smile. "I hated every minute of it, until now." Natalie's breath caught. The way he was looking at her wasn't part of the performance. It was real, raw, and utterly terrifying. "Julian ... double quotes," she began, but he pulled her closer. "I know," he said quietly. "We should stop." But neither of them moved away. The medical emergency crisis came 3 weeks into their arrangement. Natalie received a frantic call from the hospital. Owen had collapsed, his body rejecting the latest treatment. She was in the car and racing to the hospital before she'd fully processed the news. She found Owen unconscious in the ICU, machines beeping urgently around him. Natalie sank into the chair beside his bed, taking his pale hand in hers, fighting back tears. She didn't know how long she sat there before she felt a warm hand on her shoulder. Julian stood beside her, still in his surgical scrubs, his expression filled with concern. "I came as soon as I heard," he said. "I've reviewed his charts. There's an experimental treatment, not FDA approved yet, but I have connections. If you'll let me, I'd like to try." "Yes," Natalie said immediately. "Anything, please." Julian spent the next 36 hours at the hospital, personally overseeing Owen's care. Natalie watched him work, saw the fierce concentration, the gentle way he spoke to Owen when he briefly regained consciousness, the determination in every movement. This wasn't about their contract. This was Julian caring, genuinely caring, about saving her brother's life. When Owen finally stabilized, when the color began returning to his face and his vitals steadied, Natalie found Julian in the doctor's lounge. He was slumped in a chair, exhausted but relieved. "You saved him," she said, her voice breaking. "We're not out of the woods yet," Julian cautioned. But there was hope in his voice. Natalie didn't think. She crossed the room and wrapped her arms around him, holding him tight. "Thank you," she whispered against his chest. "Thank you so much." For a moment, Julian remained rigid. Then his arms came around her, pulling her close. They stood there in the quiet lounge, holding each other, and Natalie knew with absolute certainty that she was in trouble. She was falling for her contract husband, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The turning point week after Owen's crisis, Julian became distant again, retreating behind his professional walls. Natalie understood why they'd gotten too close, felt too much. The contract loomed between them like a ticking time bomb, but fate, it seemed, had other plans. Theodore Westbrook's health took a sudden turn for the worse. The family gathered at his bedside, and Natalie found herself there too. No longer just playing a role, but genuinely caring about the sharp-witted old man who'd begun teaching her chess. During her visits, "Julian," Theodore rasped, his voice weak. "Come closer, both of you." They approached the bed together, and Theodore took each of their hands, placing them together. "I need to tell you something. A confession, if you will." Julian's jaw tightened. Grandfather, save your strength. Nonsense. I'm dying, boy. Let me speak. Theodore's eyes twinkled with their old mischief. I knew from the beginning this was an arrangement. Did you think I built a medical empire by being blind? Natalie's heart plummeted. Julian's hand tensed in hers. I knew. Theodore continued, and I let it happen anyway. Do you want to know why? He coughed, and Victoria rushed to give him water. Because I saw what you couldn't see yourselves. That contract of yours was never about keeping love out. It was about giving you both permission to find it. The revelation. Julian stared at his grandfather in shock. You knew. All this time. I didn't need a real marriage, Julian. I needed you to open your heart again. Theodore's gaze turned to Natalie. After your divorce, you became a machine. Brilliant, dedicated, but hollow. Then I saw how you looked at this young woman at that gala. Before you'd even spoken to her, I saw the first spark of life in your eyes in 5 years. Victoria gasped. Charlotte looked between them with dawning understanding. I used my influence to make sure she'd be at that event. Theodore admitted without shame. I had your mother's contacts check into her background. When I learned about her brother, about her character, her strength, I knew she was exactly what you needed. Someone with her own reasons to maintain boundaries, her own walls to break down. You manipulated us, Julian said, his voice tight. I gave you a chance. Theodore corrected. What you did with it was entirely up to you. And that ridiculous emotional clause. Classic Julian trying to logic your way out of being human. He smiled. Tell me, has it worked? Have you managed not to fall in love with her? The question hung in the air like a challenge. The confession. Julian looked at Natalie, and she saw everything in his eyes, the fear, the longing, the battle he'd been fighting. No, he said quietly. It hasn't worked at all. Natalie's breath caught. Julian ... According to our contract, he continued, his voice growing stronger. I'm supposed to confess these feelings and terminate our arrangement. I'm supposed to walk away and let you go. But here's the thing, Natalie, I'm done following rules that make no sense. I'm done pretending. He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. I've been in love with you since you knelt on that ballroom floor and looked at me with such fierce dignity despite your embarrassment. I've been in love with you through every dinner conversation, every shared silence, every moment you've been brave and kind and impossibly strong. Tears streamed down Natalie's face. The contract. To hell with the contract, Julian said fiercely. I was a coward who tried to armor himself against feeling anything because I'd been hurt before. But you, Natalie Harper, you walked into my carefully controlled life and made me feel everything. Victoria was crying openly now. Charlotte was grinning. Theodore looked utterly satisfied. I love you too, Natalie whispered. I've been terrified to admit it. Terrified of losing Owen's treatment. Terrified of losing you. But I can't pretend anymore either. Julian cupped her face in his hands. Owen's treatment is secure regardless. I'll put it in writing. In blood if necessary. That was never conditional on the contract. It became personal the moment I met him. But what I'm asking now has nothing to do with agreements or arrangements. He dropped to one knee right there in his grandfather's bedroom, in front of his stunned family. Natalie Harper, I'm asking you to marry me again. For real this time. No contracts, no conditions, no escape clauses. Just a people who are terrified and imperfect and desperately in love. Will you? The resolution at Haley looked down at this brilliant, complicated man who'd broken his own rules for her. Yes, she said through her tears. Yes, 1,000 times yes. The room erupted in applause. Theodore was laughing and crying simultaneously. Finally, he said. Finally, you understand. The wedding, 6 months later, was nothing like their first arrangement. It was small and intimate, held in the garden where they'd shared their first real conversation. Owen, healthy and in remission, walked Natalie down the aisle with a grin that could have lit the entire estate. Their vows were personal and honest. Julian promised to be imperfect, to make mistakes, and to love her through all of it. Natalie promised the same, adding with a smile, and I promise never to sign another contract with you without reading the fine print. The crowd laughed. Theodore, in his wheelchair in the front row, looked on with profound satisfaction. He would pass away peacefully 3 months later, secure in the knowledge that he'd accomplished his final mission. Epilogue a year after their real wedding, Natalie stood in the grand opening of the Harper Westbrook School of Arts, a state-of-the-art facility funded by Julian's medical foundation. Owen, now a volunteer art instructor there, was helping young patients use creativity as therapy. Julian found her standing in the main gallery, looking at student artwork on the walls. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Happy?" he asked. "Impossibly so," she replied, leaning back into him. Who would have thought a fake marriage could lead to something so real? "Grandfather knew," Julian said softly. "That old schemer knew all along." Natalie turned in his arms, looking up at the man who'd started as her contract husband and become her everything. "Do you ever regret it? Any of it?" "Never," Julian said firmly. "Every moment, even the painful ones, led us here, led us to each other." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. Nearby, a group of students giggled, and Natalie pulled back with a laugh. "We're setting a bad example for the children, Dr. Westbrook." "Good," he murmured against her lips. "Let them see what real love looks like." And as the autumn sun streamed through the gallery windows, painting everything in gold, Natalie thought about impossible contracts and the unexpected ways love finds us when we're not looking. Sometimes the best agreements are the ones we break. Sometimes the rules that save us are the ones we have the courage to abandon. Their story had begun with a desperate proposition in a moonlit library. It had become something neither of them could have predicted: a partnership, a friendship, and a love that rewrote all their carefully constructed plans. And that, Natalie thought as Julian took her hand and led her to join the celebration, was the best contract violation she'd ever committed.